Have you ever noticed how some people manage to destroy their own peace even before life has actually done anything to them? All it takes is a sharp message, a different look, a delay, a criticism, bad news, a broken expectation, and everything inside collapses. The heart races, the mind starts inventing stories, the body braces itself as if facing an invisible enemy. And the strangest part is that, many times, what wounds us is not the event itself, but the speed with which we react to it. It is as if the soul were already tired of defending itself, of responding, of trying to control what comes from the outside. Maybe you know this very well. Maybe you have already had days when you barely woke up and were already emotionally hijacked by something small, a poorly chosen word, an unexpected silence, a trivial setback, and without realizing it, that took your mood, your energy, your clarity, your presence. That is why this video may be more important than it seems, because there is a Stoic lesson capable of protecting your peace in a way far deeper than simply staying calm. This is not about becoming a stone. It is not about swallowing everything. It is not about pretending nothing affects you. It is about something rarer, more mature, and more powerful, stopping the habit of handing your inner world over to every passing event. And if, at any point in this reflection, you feel that it puts into words something you have been living in silence, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and share this with someone who also needs to recover their own center. Sometimes a single idea, when it meets the right moment, changes years of emotional exhaustion. And the truth is that many good people are not tired of life itself, but of the way they react to it. There is a detail here that few people notice. Reacting feels natural, spontaneous, inevitable. But most of the time, reacting is just a habit, an old habit, a conditioned reflex, an automatic way of relating to the world. Someone says something, and you immediately defend yourself. Someone takes too long, and you immediately assume abandonment. Something slips out of your control, and anxiety rises at once. An injustice happens, and your mind spends hours rehearsing arguments that will never actually be spoken, as if every event had to immediately pass through you, occupy you, define your inner state. And this is where many people get confused. They think they are living intensely, when in truth, they are living react. There is an enormous difference between feeling and reacting. Feeling is human. Reacting to everything is slavery. The Stoics understood this a long time ago, and they did not understand it in a theoretical, distant, or cold way. They understood it because they lived in an unstable, unpredictable, harsh world. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire amid wars, disease, losses, and betrayal. Epictetus was a slave. Seneca lived surrounded by the volatility of power and the fragility of the human condition. None of them built this philosophy in a quiet room far removed from reality. They forged this vision in direct contact with life. And that is exactly why what they say still touches us, because it is still true. The world will not stop provoking. People will not stop disappointing. Days will not obey our expectations. The body will grow tired. The mind will fluctuate. Plans will fail. The difference between a life torn apart and a life held together is not the absence of disturbance, but the quality of the inner response in the face of it. Maybe you have felt this in a very concrete way. You spend days trying to organize yourself inside, but one single comment throws everything off balance. You decide not to let things shake you, but any inconvenience sets off a storm. You want peace, yet you continue giving the world unlimited access to your nervous system. And then a bitter feeling begins to appear. The feeling that your peace is too fragile, that anything can dismantle you, that living in balance is only for a few, but it is not. The problem is not that peace is impossible. The problem is that many people try to find peace without first interrupting their addiction to reaction. They want serenity, but they keep feeding impulses. They want clarity, but they cannot tolerate pauses. They want stability, but they kneel before every external disturbance. The great Stoic lesson begins exactly here, between what happens and what you do with what happens. There is a space, and that space is the place of your freedom. It sounds simple, but it is not small. In fact, it may be one of the most transformative ideas a person can truly absorb, because when you do not know that space, you live as though everything were too direct. It happened. It hurt. You reacted. You heard it. You exploded. You lost something. You panicked. You were frustrated. You shut there. But when that space begins to exist inside you, something changes in a quiet and profound way. You realize that the event comes first, the interpretation comes after, the emotion rises. Your surrender to it is something else. The impulse appears. Obeying the impulse is a choice. And it is at this point that inner strength stops being a beautiful ideal and starts becoming practice. But there is an uncomfortable part to this conversation, because as long as we are immature, we tend to blame the world for our inner disorder. I got like this because of that person. My whole day was ruined because of that news. I lost my peace because they did this to me. In some cases, of course, there is real pain, real injustice, real aggression. This is not about denying that, but there is a deeper level where the question is not only what happened to me, but why did this gain such immediate power over me? And that question changes everything, because it restores dignity, it restores responsibility, it restores presence. Reacting to everything is living as though your emotional state were always outsourced. It is living as if every gesture from someone else were holding a rope tied to your center. All they have to do is pull, and you move. One touch and you lose direction. One noise and you'll leave yourself. Epictetus said that it is not things themselves that disturb people, but the judgments they make about those things. Many people hear this and think it sounds abstract, but look at your life honestly and you will see it happening all the time. Two people receive the same criticism. One falls apart for days. The other reflects, takes what is useful, and moves on. Two people face a delay. One becomes irritated, loses their mood, and contaminates the atmosphere. The other adjusts what can be adjusted and preserves their composure. Two people receive silence. One turns it into rejection. The other recognizes that they do not know what the other person is going through. The external fact did not arrive already stamped with an absolute meaning. Something inside us completes the scene. Something inside us decides, often without our noticing, whether that will become a passing discomfort or a mental prison. And there is an even deeper detail here. We are not always reacting to the present. Many times we are reacting to the past being activated by the present. A phrase spoken today touches an old humiliation. A current distancing awakens old abandonment wounds. A common disagreement triggers memories of being and then we believe we are responding to the current moment, when in truth we are repeating an old emotional pattern. That is why so much reaction seems exaggerated even to the person reacting. They explode and later think that was too much, and it was. But the body and mind were not responding only to that moment. They were responding to an accumulation, to a history that had not been digested, to an identity built around threat. That is why stopping the habit of reacting to everything is not merely a moral discipline. It is also a deep healing. It is the beginning of interrupting the automatic transmission of pain. Maybe you have noticed that some people are always ready for confrontation, for defense, for negative interpretation, for the worst-case scenario. They are not always bad, dramatic, or unstable. Sometimes they are simply tired, wounded, hyper-alert people. People who have lived so long preparing for impact that they no longer know how to rest inside themselves. And that is exhausting, because reacting to everything consumes vital energy. It consumes focus. It consumes beauty. It consumes presence. The person wakes up already interpreting, anticipating, protecting themselves, justifying themselves, reliving, comparing, and when night comes, they are exhausted without necessarily having done anything great. The fatigue did not come only from what happened. It came from the constant inner friction. Seneca observed something essential. We suffer more in imagination than in reality. And this connects directly with reaction, because reacting is not only speaking, replying, fighting, or crying. Reacting is also ruminating. It is continuing to feed inwardly what could already have passed. It is replaying the scene 100 times. It is having mental conversations with someone who is not there. It is fabricating endings, justifications, and silent revenge. There are people who never raise their voices, yet live in permanent reaction inside their own minds. On the outside, they seem controlled. On the inside, they are at war. And inner war also steals peace. Sometimes even more than visible conflict does. There is a kind of strength that the world admires because it is loud. The person answers immediately, imposes themselves, wins arguments, pushes back against everything, never takes anything home. That can look like power, but it is not always power. Often it is simply the inability to endure discomfort without discharging it immediately. Stoic strength, on the other hand, is less visible and much rarer. It appears when someone can avoid rushing to obey the first impulse, when someone can bear emotional heat without instantly turning it into action, when someone protects their own center before trying to correct the world. This kind of strength almost never draws attention in the first moment, but it is the kind that preserves the soul. Think about how many situations you regretted, not because of what you felt, but because of how quickly you reacted. A message sent at the peak of irritation, a conversation ruined by pride, a rushed interpretation, a decision made at the height of fear, a relationship worn down by repeated assumptions. Most of the time, the mistake did not begin in the feeling. It began in the fusion between feeling and identity. I am angry, therefore I must act from anger. I am anxious, therefore something must truly be wrong. I am hurt, therefore the other person attacked me. But feeling does not confirm. Feeling informs, and that changes life. Emotion brings data, not the impulse presents itself, but it does not have to be crowned king. Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself as someone trying to remember a truth in the middle of chaos. You have power over your mind, not over external events. And notice how this sentence, despite being famous, is still deeply misunderstood. Having power over the mind does not mean controlling thoughts by force, abolishing emotions, or living in automatic serenity. It means training the faculty of not surrendering completely to the first inner movement. It means developing governance. And inner governance is different from repression. Repression shoves downward. Governance observes, names, sustains, and directs. Repression pretends not to feel. Governance feels without kneeling. Perhaps one of the most useful images for understanding this is that of an inner house. Every time something external happens, someone knocks at the door, a criticism knocks, a loss knocks, a delay knocks, a malicious comment knocks, a fear knocks, an old trigger knocks. The problem is that many people do not merely open the door, they throw open the whole house. The event comes in, sits in the living room, takes over the atmosphere, rummages through the drawers, speaks louder than consciousness, and still sets the tone for the entire day. Stoic practice is not about building an indifferent wall. It is about learning to receive without surrendering control. It is about looking at what has arrived and saying, silently, I see you, but you are not going to govern everything in here. And this is where peace stops being passivity and becomes sovereignty. Because peace is not a delicate state that exists only when nothing disturbs you. That would be dependence on ideal conditions. Real peace is the ability to keep an axis even when something displeases, frustrates, or destabilizes you. It is not the absence of movement. It is the presence of a center. It is not numbness. It is order. It is not escape from reality. It is intimacy with what truly matters. A person at peace is not someone who is never provoked. It is someone who does not offer their whole self to every provocation. There is a reason why this is so difficult today. The modern world rewards reactivity. Everything is designed to capture your attention, your outrage, your speed, your instant opinion. Social media trains fast responses, rushed judgments, constant comparison, emotional impulses without digestion. The entire culture seems to say, if you felt it, post it. If you disagreed, attack. If it hurt, expose it. If it bothered you, amplify it. Reaction has become identity. Calm has become suspicious. Silence has become weakness. Reflection has become slowness. But the human soul does not flourish under constant acceleration. It fragments, and that is why so many people feel emotionally invaded all the time, even without knowing exactly why. Maybe you have already had the experience of being pulled into someone else's chaos. Someone arrives burdened, aggressive, tensy, impatient, and without realizing it, you'll step into the same field. Their energy becomes yours. Their conflict contaminates your breathing. Their lack of control hijacks your equilibrium. This is a central point of maturity. Learning not to host everything that arrives. Not every emotion from another person needs to find a home in you. Not every tension needs to be answered with tension. Not every injustice needs to be responded to in the same tone. There is a quiet dignity in not becoming similar to what tried to wound you. But do not confuse that with submission. Stoicism does not teach cowardly passivity. It teaches lucidity before action. Sometimes the response does need to come. Sometimes the boundary must be set. Sometimes the difficult conversation is necessary. Sometimes distance is wisdom. But all of that changes in quality when it does not arise from brute impulse, but from consciousness. The same no can come loaded with reactivity or with firmness. The same silence can be avoidance or mastery. The same distancing can be punishment or preservation. What defines it is not merely the outward act, but the inner state from which it comes. There is one simple question that can save you from much exhaustion. Does this really deserve to govern my inner state? Notice the depth of that. Does it deserve to? Because many things affect us, not because of their greatness, but because of our lack of discernment. We give small things a throne they should never have. A random comment ruins hours. Someone else's opinion invades days. A trivial delay contaminates relationships. A small scene acquires unnecessary proportions. It is as if there were no hierarchy inside us. Everything enters with the same weight. Everything receives the same priority. Everything triggers the same level of disturbance. And when there is no inner hierarchy, there is no lasting peace. Stopping the habit of reacting to everything also means learning to distinguish what is uncomfortable from what is threatening, to distinguish opinion from truth, to distinguish discomfort from real harm, to distinguish what requires a response from what merely requires maturity, to distinguish what belongs to you from what is someone else's projection. This capacity for distinction is a high form of self-control, because lack of control does not appear only in explosion. It also appears in the inability to discern. Whoever reacts to everything lives as though everything were equally serious, and that is one way of becoming sick. Perhaps the most liberating point in this journey is realizing that not everything you feel needs to become a story about you. You can feel rejection without concluding that you are unloved. You can feel fear without concluding that you are in danger. You can feel anger without concluding that you must attack. You can feel sadness without concluding that you are defeated. You can feel frustration without concluding that life is against you. This separation between sensation and narrative is a sacred boundary. When it strengthens, the mind stops being an impulsive courtroom and becomes a more trustworthy place to inhabit. Many people have spent their whole lives believing that protection means reacting quickly. But in many cases, a quick reaction does not protect. It exposes. It reveals the wound. It hands over the center. It shows that any external touch still has direct access to your core. True protection, many times, is not giving unlimited access. It is allowing the world to knock, but not to enter without filtering. It is choosing slowness instead of reflex. It is allowing consciousness to arrive before the response. There is power in that. A calm power. A clean power. A power that does not depend on defeating the other person, but on not losing yourself. And perhaps that is exactly what you most need today. Not to win arguments, not to convince everyone, not to guarantee that nothing unpleasant will happen, but not to lose yourself so easily. Because losing yourself is a kind of invisible bleeding. You keep functioning, working, talking, solving things, but inside you are far from your own center. You are scattered among events, opinions, fears, and noise, and peace becomes impossible, not because it does not exist, but because you are absent from yourself. There is a silent practice the Stoics engaged in constantly, watching their own impressions. In other words, not automatically accepting the first way something appears to the mind. This is revolutionary because the first impression often comes loaded with distortion, fear, habit, pride, or trauma. They are disrespecting me. Everything is going to go wrong. She meant to hurt me. I cannot handle this. This is unbearable. How many Chinis? Does our mind speak in absolutes before experiences that are bearable, temporary, and open to interpretation? Watching the impression means asking, is this exactly the way it is? Or is this how it looks from within my current state? That question, honestly asked, already reduces half the reaction. There are people who think too much, feel too much, anticipate too much, and for that reason, believe the problem is that they are deep. Not always. Sometimes, the problem is the lack of inner training. Depth without governance turns into turbulence. Sensitivity without discernment turns into exhaustion. Awareness without an axis turns into hypervigilance. It is not enough to feel deeply. You have to know how to hold what you feel without being dragged by it. That is a form of greatness that is rarely spoken of. The world praises visible talent, public achievements, powerful speeches, but there is immense nobility in someone who can remain whole in the face of chaos. Maybe you are wondering, but how do I actually do this? When life truly presses in, it begins with something that seems small. Delay the reaction. Do not solve everything during the first emotional wave. Do not believe everything the mind says in the first few minutes. Do not respond at the peak. Do not decide at the height of pain. Do not turn impression into certainty. It seems small, but it is a gesture of very high emotional intelligence, because the first wave is rarely the wisest one. It is the loudest one. And many lives become complicated, not because of great tragedies, but because of decisions made at the loudest volume of the soul. Maybe you have already experienced this. Something happens. You want to respond immediately, but you wait, you breathe, you sleep on it, you walk, you pray, you stay silent. And the next day, you realize that half the urgency was theatrical, half the certainty was undigested emotion, half the narrative was wrong. That does not mean everything resolves itself. It simply means that an agitated mind produces versions of the world that do not deserve absolute trust. The Stoic understands this. He does not treat the first interpretation as final revelation. He treats it as material to be examined. There is something very beautiful in this philosophy that sometimes goes unnoticed. Stoic self-control is not a gesture against life. It is a gesture in favor of what is most dignified in life. Because when you stop reacting to everything, you begin to choose more carefully where your energy goes. And energy is destiny. Whatever repeatedly drains you ends up defining the quality of your days. If your energy is spent on small irritations, useless comparisons, minor offenses, unfounded assumptions, and repetitive fears, there is little left for what truly matters: to love well, to think well, to care well, to create well, to move through life with presence. There are people who reach maturity carrying a resume of useless battles. Arguments that never needed to happen. Resentments over tiny things. Nights lost to worries that never came true. Relationships worn down by hasty interpretations. And looking back, they realized something painful. The greatest thief of their peace was not fate, but the impulsiveness with which they related to it. It is hard to admit that, but it is also liberating. Because if your reaction has participated in the problem, then your consciousness can participate in the solution. And here we arrive at a fundamental reversal. For a long time, you may have believed that peace would come when the world finally cooperated, when people became more mature, when finances stabilized, when family understood, when health improved, when the past stopped hurting, when the environment became less hostile. Some of those things really do help, but the deepest peace begins before that. It begins when you decide not to ally yourself with everything that threatens your center. It begins when you stop collaborating with your own disturbance. It begins when, in the face of the inevitable, you choose not to add inner drama to what is already difficult. This does not eliminate pain. And it is important to say that clearly. There are moments when life wounds deeply. Grief, illness, betrayal, failure, loneliness, aging, irreversible losses. Stoicism is not a trick for avoiding suffering. It is an art of suffering without unnecessary degradation. It is allowing pain to be pain, without needing it to become the collapse of the soul. It is crying without abandoning yourself. It is grieving without turning sorrow into a permanent identity. It is crossing what is difficult without surrendering your dignity. There is a kind of peace that is born precisely in the roughest terrain. Not the peace of ease, but the peace of maturity. The kind that says, I do not control everything, but I can still choose how to position myself. That sentence, truly lived, is almost a rebirth, because it returns to the human being what despair tries to steal: the ability to consciously participate in one's own experience. Reacting to everything is losing that participation. It is living chained to the immediate. The Stoic posture, on the other hand, restores interiority, elevation, perspective. And perhaps that is what is missing in many hearts: perspective. When we react too much, everything gets too close. The offense becomes enormous. The setback becomes absolute. The failure becomes final. Fear turns into prophecy. But when perspective appears, the mind breathes. You begin to see proportion. Is this serious or merely unpleasant? Will this matter a week from now, a month from now, a year from now? Does this speak about reality or about a wound I still carry? Does this require action now or simply presence? Perspective does not erase the fact, but it prevents it from growing beyond its measure. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself of the brevity of life, not in order to become sad, but in order to refine his priorities. And this applies perfectly here. How many reactions that seem urgent today will be irrelevant in light of time passing? How many conflicts would lose strength if they were seen in the light of finitude? How many impulses would dissolve if we remembered that our days are too precious to hand over to every noise? There is wisdom in asking, is this really how I want to spend my inner life? Because every excessive reaction is also an expenditure of time, of soul, of presence. Maybe you have spent years trying to be understood by everyone, respected by everyone, validated by everyone, and that makes every emotional friction costly, because every disagreement feels like a threat to identity. Every rejection feels like condemnation. Every criticism feels like a denial of worth. But freedom begins when you stop depending so heavily on other people's responses to maintain your stability. Not because other people do not matter, but because your roots cannot remain completely exposed to the external climate. A tree does not survive if it depends on every wind being gentle. And here there is something beautiful and severe at the same time. Peace is a commitment, not a blessing that falls at random, but a discipline of return. You lose your center and come back. You become agitated and come back. You grow irritated and come back. You become sad and come back. You get distracted and come back. This applies to prayer, meditation, silence, philosophical reflection, conscious breathing, the watching of thoughts. Mature peace does not exist without repetition. The center is not sustained by occasional inspiration. It is built through practice. Maybe what makes this so challenging is the fact that reacting gives an immediate sensation of relief. Saying everything, discharging, justifying, proving, accusing, dramatizing, controlling. For a moment, it feels as if something has been resolved. But many times, quick relief demands a high price afterward. Conscious non-reaction, on the other hand, may feel uncomfortable at first. It requires holding inner heat without automatic discharge. It requires tolerating uncertainty. It requires refusing to feed the ego's most seductive narrative. It requires the humility to admit that the first reading may be wrong. But that initial discomfort often produces freedom afterward. And freedom is worth more than impulsive relief. There is a very old and very true image. You cannot prevent a spark from appearing, but you can prevent it from finding dry material everywhere. Life brings sparks it always wow. But what is inside you? Straw or present? Flammable accumulation or breathable space? Old patterns waiting for any opportunity to catch fire. When a person lives reactively, almost everything burns. When that person begins to mature, not every spark finds fuel. That does not mean coldness. It means inner cleanliness. It means not everything still has somewhere to cling. And perhaps one of the great healings of maturity is precisely this: becoming less flammable, not through hardening, but through integration. Not because nothing matters, but because you no longer need to turn everything into a threat against a self. Criticism can hurt without destroying. Delay can inconvenience without ruining. Someone else's silence can sadden without activating panic. Failure can teach without humiliating. The unexpected can require adjustment without producing collapse. Little by little, life remains life, but you stop being a minefield. There comes a moment in the inner journey when you realize something almost sacred. Not reacting to everything is a form of because the person who reacts to everything lives in permanent wear and tear. They offer their body to stress, their mind to excess, their energy to noise. The one who learns to select, breathe, discern, and respond with consciousness is saying to themselves, my peace deserves protection. And that is not selfishness, it is responsibility. A person without peace spreads agitation. A person with a center spreads presence. The well-being of a disciplined soul reaches others without the need for speeches. Maybe someone is hearing this now and thinking, but I have been this way for many years. And it is okay to recognize that, not with condemnation, but with truth. Maybe you built an identity around reaction. Maybe you have always been the most explosive, the most sensitive to tone, the most anxious in uncertainty, the quickest to conclude the worst. Maybe you learned very early that being alert was survival. Maybe you spent a long time without feeling welcomed, and because of that, you developed reflexes of defense before you ever developed trust. None of that makes you a lost cause. It only makes you someone who needs a new training of the soul. And that training begins in the small things. In traffic, in line, in delay, in the unanswered message, in the comment you could ruminate on, but decide to release. In the moment when you notice anger rising and, instead of fusing with it, Observe it in the instant when anxiety wants to invent 10 scenarios, and you choose to return to the concrete fact. In the moment when the need to explain yourself appears, but you ask whether you really need to. It is in the small that the great is built. No one develops peace only in enormous crises. Peace is cultivated in the invisible micro-choices of everyday life. There is a detail here that few people truly respect. Composure strengthens through repetition. The more you practice not reacting automatically, the more your inner system learns that it is possible to survive without obeying impulse. And that re-educates the body, the mind, the breath, the perception. Gradually, the space between stimulus and response stops being theoretical and becomes lived experience. You actually feel that there is an interval. You actually perceive that you can choose. You actually discover that impulse is not sovereign. And this discovery is profoundly liberating. Then there comes a beautiful moment, almost imperceptible, when what used to disorganize you begins to lose strength, not because the world's changed, but because you change your position in relation to it. Criticism no longer enters in the same way. Someone else's silence no longer defines your dignity. The unexpected no longer hijacks the whole day. External opinion no longer becomes an absolute tribunal. And you realize that peace did not arrive as a miracle. It was being protected through small acts of fidelity to your own center. Of course, there will be relapses. There will be days of fatigue, old triggers, rushed responses, moments of emotional exhaustion. But even that can be lived in another way, without dramatizing the failure, without turning one stumble into identity, without using the mistake as a reason to give up. True Stoicism is not perfectionistic. It is persevering. It does not demand that you never waver. It demands that you return. Recollect yourself, learn, adjust, continue. Deep serenity does not belong to the one who is never disturbed. It belongs to the one who knows how to return after disturbance. And perhaps, deep down, that is what distinguishes a mature soul from a drifting one. The drifting soul lives according to whatever touches it. The mature soul lives from what it chooses to preserve. One lives reacting. The other lives governing. One lives exposed to everything. The other has learned to filter. One asks the world to be gentle. The other becomes stronger in order to pass through it. And see how liberating this is. You do not need to wait for the world to become lighter in order to stop being heavy inside. There is a silence that is born when you stop answering everything. An inner silence, not empty, but firm. It does not mean the absence of thoughts. It means the reduction of unnecessary noise. It is the silence of someone who does not need to comment inwardly on every movement of the world. The silence of someone who does not want to turn every experience into conflict, defense, or narrative. The silence of someone who begins to trust their own presence more than the compulsion to control, explain, or retaliate. This silence is a refuge, and many of us need to return to it. Maybe life has been trying to teach you for a long time, precisely through the things that throw you off balance the most. Not to wound you, but to show you where you are still governed, where there is still excessive attachment, where fear is still dressed as certainty, where pride is still interpreting everything as attack, where the need for approval is still turning every disappointment into crisis. Disturbances, seen honestly, sometimes reveal not only the world, but the parts of us that are still asking for maturity. And then the question stops being, how do I make life stop provoking me? And becomes, who do I need to become so that I am not dragged by every provocation? That is a noble question. It is the question of an inner adult, of someone who is tired of living emotionally outsourced, of someone who realizes that peace is not a prize of luck, but the fruit of alignment, of someone who understands that they do not need to win every argument, answer every offense, correct every other person's perception, or anticipate every problem in order to live with dignity. There is immense freedom in letting some things pass without needing to turn them into battle. Not every misunderstanding deserves an explanation. Not every criticism deserves a defense. Not every distance deserves pursuit. Not every provocation deserves a response. Not every internal fluctuation deserves trust. That is not giving up on life. It is stopping the waste of it. It is gathering back the energy that had been scattered across secondary conflicts and returning it to what holds real value. In the end, The Stoic lesson that protects your peace is not a technique that merely looks strong. It is a change in inner government. It is deciding that not everything will have access to the center. It is realizing that the world can be unstable without you having to be unstable. It is understanding that self-control is not hardening, but refinement. It is learning that dignity grows when reaction diminishes. It is discovering that true strength does not lie in answering everything, but in knowing exactly what not to answer. So the next time something touches you deeply, try to remember the first impulse is not the final verdict. The event has arrived, but you still exist before the reaction. There is a space, there is a breath, there is a consciousness that can choose not to kneel before the immediate. Maybe that is the beginning of your freedom. Maybe that is the beginning of a more adult peace, less fragile, less dependent, less vulnerable to the noise of the world. Maybe that is how you finally discover that protecting your own peace is not withdrawing from life, but walking through it without handing your soul over to every wind. And when that happens, something very beautiful is revealed. The world remains imperfect. People remain human. Days remain unpredictable. But inside you, a new solidity begins to be born. A calm that is not navit, a firmness that is not hardness, a serenity that does not depend on the silence of the world, because it has learned to cultivate enough silence with it. And perhaps that is one of the greatest signs of wisdom, to remain sensitive but no longer captive, to remain human but no longer reactive, to remain alive but finally at peace.